Chair, Mayor, Council. My name is Peter Waldkirch, and I'm here to speak strongly in support of building the Skytrain all the way to UBC. The need for this project is overwhelming. You all know that. And transit along the Broadway corridor is bursting at the seams. I use transit as my primary mode of transportation in this city, and I can tell you the beeline is always full. Doesn't matter if it's weekday, weekends, morning, middle of the day, evening, school's in, school's out. I can almost never get a seat on the thing. And now members of council who regularly use transit will know that being crowded has a huge impact on the quality of the overall transit experience. When buses are regularly crowded, it discourages use. It makes me, a lifelong and primary transit user, makes me reluctant to recommend it, for example, to my family, to my elderly father, to my brother who never uses transit, when the experience is uncomfortable. So as you're looking at these capacity numbers in the studies and the reports, please keep in mind that capacity is not just about how many people you can cram into something. It's about how comfortable and welcoming the overall experience is, including for people with strollers, who have disabilities, who have mobility aids, and so on. Now, when you look at the alternatives, some people say the funds should go elsewhere, and I've got a few things to say about that. When you look at the alternatives, two things really jump out at me that the alternatives are far worse on: speed and capacity. And I've already spoken about capacity. When you're looking at those numbers, please remember what it's like to actually get on something that's at 99% full or something like that. But I also want to talk about speed because, yes, local service is important. Local buses with many stops in villages and so on, that's important. But people who use transit regularly know sometimes you just need to get from one end of the city to the other as quickly as possible for school, for work, for life, for all sorts of things. So please do not underestimate the value of being able to move across the entire city quickly. A Skytrain along Broadway will be a backbone that other transit can connect to. We need to be, but people do need to make cross-city trips. Right now, they look at their car because it's faster than stopping every block or every other block. We need to be giving those people an alternative. And to get people out of the cars and using transit, capacity matters and speed matters. These alternatives also aren't certain. As people have been saying, we need to be realistic about when opportunities arise and strike while the iron is hot. We need to build off the momentum of building the Skytrain to Arbutus. Now, others say we should delay and wait for the city plan to complete. And I say that the city plan cannot be used as an excuse to do nothing on housing and transit. The city plan is going to take years, people, and I hope that council recognizes the urgency of the housing and transit problems in this city. Because here's what it really comes down to. The very day one, the Skytrain along Broadway opens, it will make a huge difference to the daily lives of thousands of people, and for every day after that. And every day we put off that opening day, it is a failure. Now, I mentioned the idea of a backbone, and I'd like to comment on that a bit more. Some people may have heard of the phrase of a network effect, and that just describes the idea that when things connect to other things, it becomes more valuable the more things you can connect to. If I was the only person on the planet that had a phone, it would be useless. If one other person has a phone, now we're getting somewhere. If billions of people have a phone, it's tremendously powerful. Well, train stations are the same. The more stops there are, the more valuable every other stop becomes. And so by building this line, we're not just adding a few stops, we're enhancing the value of every existing stop that already exists. We're enhancing the value of the existing network. I mean, imagine being able to take the Skytrain from UBC, from Kitts, to the Skytrain station right down the street to City Hall, and then zip right down to the airport. That's transformative. That will change lives. Slow local service, with many stops, while important, and I urge council to also invest in that, it just can't duplicate that effect. And that's really the key. The ability to move quickly and reliably across the city will transform lives. It will create opportunity, and it will foster equity every single day. Now, I was going to end there, but I have to comment on a couple of other things that I've heard while sitting here in council today. I have heard people oppose this project call the mayor a liar. Something that I found really shocking, and I hope you'll excuse my language here, Chair, is when I think it was the third or fourth speaker, the young woman from UBC was speaking, an elderly gentleman quite loudly called out bullshit. That to me is emblematic of a lot of what's going on in this discussion, in my experiences in real life, online, and other places. An elderly man calling out bullshit while a young woman tries to make her voice heard. Let's be realistic. Obviously, there's more to it than this, but let's be realistic and acknowledge that there is a generational issue going on here. The people who are showing up to speak in favor of this project are students, schools, businesses looking for employees, people like me who just want to get to work, who want to be able to go to meetings in Richmond or across the city quickly and reliably. The people who are opposing it, many of them at least, in my experience, their primary concern is to keep things the way they were. That cannot be the focus of this council. We heard, suppose somebody who likes to think of herself, I'm sure, as progressive, opposing a massive investment in transit, and high-speed transit across the city, in part on the basis that it might encourage evil towers being built along Broadway. I used to live in a tower. I knew my neighbors. It was my home. To say that people like that, to keep people like that out of your neighborhood, to say that that's a good reason to oppose desperately needed infrastructure like this, to me, that is unconscionable. And I urge council to approve this project, to move forward with it, and to keep its eye on the future of the city. Because if you try to hold too tightly onto the past, very bad things will happen.
Thank you, sir.
Questions? Those are mine.
Yeah, there are some questions, so if you would just stay in place, and Councillor DeGenova, you may start.
Thank you very much. You had referenced something that I was actually thinking about when another speaker was presenting to us, and that was that the city can't stop until the city-wide plan is complete. So when we talk about that, you had referenced housing. Then fair enough. We continue to hold public hearings here at the City of Vancouver and move forward with looking at different options for housing and development. I would assume the same applies to renters' protections and everything else. So if is it fair to say, are you asking us to apply the same lens to transit as we would, and specifically this project, as we would to all of those other things that we're looking at, like housing, making sure that we continue the business of the city and move forward carefully, knowing that we will have a citywide plan, but not to stop business completely. Is that fair to say? I didn't want to put words in your mouth, but I have to tell you what I heard you say to ask if that was correct.
I think so. I can't comment, obviously, on all of the business of council, but I can say as a general matter that, yes, the citywide plan should not be used as an excuse to maintain the status quo or to foist predatory delay on needed projects.
Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much. Mayor Stewart.
Great. Thanks very much for your comments today and the passion with your speaking of this. Yes, and thanks for clarifying some of the points. Of course, the current 10-year plan that the mayors have put forward and that we're working through, which of course includes the Arbutus extension, that's a package of funding that comes forward. And so what we're looking at is including this in the kind of next package of funding that the feds. So I mean, obviously you're in favor of this, but I'm just wondering if you did say you want to talk about funding. Is there anything else that you wanted to add on the funding side of things?
Oh, just in general, that I understand that, some people are speaking as if delay isn't a big deal, that we could delay this and, why not? I think that, first of all, undervalues the tremendous amount of work that I know has already been done to get us to this point. It's not as if there haven't been consultations. It's not as if there haven't been many reports and studies and so forth. Second of all, delay, as I said, this is a matter of urgency, and so delay itself causes harm. And finally, I'm a layperson, I'm not privy to all the discussions, but it certainly seems to me that it will be easier to try and move this forward while the line to Arbutus is still sort of in the gestation period, so to speak, than after it's, say, done, right? If we delay this for a few more years while more studies and consultations are done, then I imagine it'll be a lot more difficult to start this up and get the ball going again. We should build off of the momentum of the existing approved projects.
That's right. And at the Big City Mayors Conference, as a couple of days ago, the feds are warm to the idea of another 10-year funding envelope. So that's why this is so critical and not to get left out of that envelope. So I'm just, and I guess the other part is I'm a transit user just like you, came here by Skytrain this morning, and what really affects where I decide to go is a transit where you have to transfer. And so that you pointed out at Arbutus that this is this is a challenge because if we don't continue with Skytrain, it would be a transfer point. I mean, does this affect your transiting too? Does it affect where you decide to go?
Absolutely. I will use Google Maps a lot to sort of help me plan my transit stuff, because it's tied into the schedules and so forth. And I'll often choose a route that might, in theory, take a couple minutes extra, but might involve one less transfer, for example, because I know that every transfer point is a point of unreliability and basically a point where you can have a misconnection or something could go wrong. Also, part of the one of the things I enjoy about the transit experience is when you can just sort of relax and read a book or listen to music or read the news or whatever, and transit points kind of mess with that, right? So yes, I think that the less sort of connection points that there are, the more viable the network that the option becomes, for, especially for people who aren't used to using transit.